This video about nitrogen in a koi pond probably contains the most important story there is to know about keeping koi. Welcome to the School of Koi. The goal of all koi keepers worldwide is to keep koi problem-free. My aim with this channel is to help you with that. The most important aim for koi keepers worldwide is to just enjoy their koi. There's one requirement for that, and that is problem-free koi keeping. You can't enjoy koi if you have worries about the health of the koi. This knowledge about nitrogen in a koi pond will do just that. Help you keep koi problem-free in the future. We have to start the story with the nitrogen flow. Well, actually a basic understanding of the nitrogen flow. The nitrogen is part of the nitrogen flow. It's not a nitrogen cycle, it's a flow, because in a koi pond there is no complete cycle. I'll explain that later. The first thing that happens is that you feed your koi pellets, food. They will process that, grow, but also excrete a lot of waste. And this waste has to be dealt with in your filter. It has to leave your system again, as I'll explain later. How that happens, several different kinds of bacteria, is not really that important. Most important part is that it's about the nitrogen. Why is that important, this nitrogen? Well, there's a lot of chemical reactions going on in the pond, but you really don't need to know all of them. That middle blue ball depicted here is nitrogen. And there are red balls or green balls that either stick to it or get exchanged. More or less, those are the chemical processes. They help if you know them, but you don't have to realize them right now. What you have to realize is that that same one blue ball at the start is the same one blue ball at the end. And I look at that as marbles. Why is that important? Well, if you feed your koi marbles in a pond is a closed system, you're actually entering more and more marbles. They go through different chemical processes, but the end result is that more and more marbles get put in. If you don't do anything with that, actually the bucket will flow over. There's too much marbles in there. If the number of marbles, the number of nitrogen molecules in your system is too high, that is where koi gets sick. So this is why it's such an important message. So we need to do something with that. Through the feeding, nitrogen enters the koi pond. Then what? How do we get rid of the nitrogen? Well, the first step is a good pre-filter. This pre-filter will get rid of leaves and uneaten pellets. If you do that fast, they don't have to disintegrate and get processed by the rest of the filter. The other options are replacing water, growth of the koi, string algae, plant growth, and bacteria dirt below the filter material in your filter, and nitrogen gas. Let me take you through these processes and see which one is the most important one. So how do we get rid of the nitrogen? Well, first thing, replacing water. It is good to replace some water every week to prevent a pH crash of the whole system, for instance. Koi hobbyists at a maximum replace 20% per water per week. There are exceptions to the rule, of course. Some people exchange 100% a day, but that is pushing it. Most people try to do 10% per week. But do you get rid of nitrogen that way? If you replace 20% per week, that means there's 80% still there. If the next week you add food to the system, you get, say, 180% again. So 180 marbles. If you then get rid of 20 marbles again, or 20% of the marbles again, you still have 130, 140 left. So that's more than when you start with. If you do that week and week and week, then you can quickly calculate that this is not the main reason how you get rid of the nitrogen. It does help, but it's not the main reason. Growth of koi, of course it helps, but it's only it's a low percentage of the total amount of nitrogen that goes into the system. And of course, if you don't feed koi, they still use energy and they still then excrete waste material containing nitrogen. String algae are obviously a very good way to get rid of nitrogen. It's not good for your pond, it's not good for the pond owner, because it's a lot of work, but the nitrogen is removed quite efficiently. But it's not preferably. We don't want that too much, because your whole system will clog up. The filters will clog up, and then really there's problems arising. Plant growth, that works well in the summer when plants grow, obviously. But most koi ponds do not have enough plants. Some have plants, all plants help a little bit, but you really need a lot of plants to get rid of the amount of nitrogen that we throw into a koi pond. I'm not talking about a pond with a few koi, I'm talking about a koi pond. And usually koi ponds don't contain enough plants to do this. There's another way. Bacteria will accumulate in the bottom of your filter. Dirt will, that is actually the sludge in the bottom of your filter material. And that way you can actually get rid of nitrogen because it's stored inside this bacterial debris. It depends on the sugar levels and the total pollution in the water, how much of that debris is formed and how much of the nitrogen will go out of the system through the debris. You don't want too much of that because it can also trigger the wrong kind of bacteria. Nitrogen gas is actually the preferred way to get rid of nitrogen in a good, well-running system. You don't see it, you can't measure it, but this is the main cause of nitrogen leaving our koi pond systems. Luckily, most of these chemical reactions, from the waste up to nitrogen gas or debris, take place in the filter. So once you realize that nitrogen is the most important part of your waste products, waste process, is that you can calculate how much you have to put in marbles for your koi to grow well. But if you know how much food you put in, you also know how much nitrogen marbles that you're putting in. And you know also how much nitrogen marbles you have to get out of the system. Well, this is where your filter comes in, because this is where the magic happens. In your filter, these bacteria grow that actually process these waste materials. But these bacteria need a place to settle. And that is where the NVN app comes in. This app is made by the Dutch Koi Association and can help all koi hobbyists throughout the world. Because we know it has been scientifically proven that the amount of marbles, nitrogen you put in, actually is the same amount that you need to get rid of. And we know from scientific observations how much nitrogen can be broken down by filter material, by actually bacteria that grow on this filter material. And so you know how much filter material you need if you know how much food you put in your system. That is where the app can help you. And make sure you clean your pre-filter and your main filter enough times per week or per month, and so that you keep it clear. So you remove the sludge that is below your filter material. That way you get rid of nitrogen. So there's also another answer, perhaps. Can we just simply add less marbles? Well, no, because koi need a minimum amount of food to survive and thrive and actually get ready for the next winter. They eat the maximum amount in the summer when it's nice and warm, because then their gut can process the most amount of food. If you want maximum growth out of your koi, people tend to feed them more and more and more. As I said, it's scientifically proven that the number of pellets with nitrogen that you put in your system is also the amount of nitrogen that you have to get rid of through your filter system. This is one of such scientific articles, studies that has been done. As you can see, the amount of ammonia waste products that are excreted are on the y-axis and the time is on the x-axis. The bottom line that you see here, the pictured line, is already the amount of waste materials that are excreted by the koi when you don't feed them, when you feed them nothing. So this is also the reason that you have to keep your filter going also in winter. They always excrete some background of waste materials. But what happens if you feed them 1% of their body weight? So say a koi is 10 kilograms, a big koi, and you feed them 100 grams per day, if that is 1% of their body weight. If you give that to that koi at time is 2 hours, then about 4 to 6 hours later, up to 8 hours later, ammonia is excreted by the fish. So these are actually the marbles that have been taken up by the food through the pellets in the gut of the fish. And a couple of hours later, he starts shedding this ammonia and waste products. This takes a few hours and then the koi excretes less and less and less until it's back to the background of koi that have not been fed food. You can see this as what happens in your koi pond. In the morning, if you start feeding your koi, a couple of hours later, they start excreting waste materials. That is when your filter needs to get going. And a couple hours later, less and less is excreted and your filter can slow down again. Do we want that? That's another discussion for a later time point. But this is what happens when you feed them 1% body weight. And it gets up to about 45 milligrams of ammonia per kilogram per hour. You can forget this number explicitly as a number, but you can remember it because if you give the koi 2% body weight, then you can already see that the koi start to excrete not 45 milligrams per kilogram per hour, but 60 milligrams per kilogram per hour. And the actual peak excretion also lasts a lot longer. It takes a longer time before it goes, the level of ammonia that is excreted drops back to normal. People that really want to feed a lot to their koi start feeding up to 3%. With young koi, maybe older koi, don't do it. But if you start feeding even little koi 3%, which they can cope with, 3% of their body weight, what happens is that they start excreting up to 90 milligrams per kilogram per hour. So it's almost double than if you give them 1%. All this, nearly all the ammonia that you put in the system also comes out. And it comes in the water and your filter has to cope with that. Which is not an issue as long as you know it. As long as you know that the amount of food that you put in produces the amount of waste materials that your filter has to cope with and get rid out of the system. The free NVN Koi app can help you with that. The first thing you can do when you open the app is that you can add your koi. Not just a picture, which is nice always also. And this helps you to get an overview of how much koi you have. So you get a realization, do I not have too many koi already? The first thing that you need to do is really enter the number of koi and also how long they are. Give an estimate at the very least. If you can measure them, that is better. That gives you a better starting point in the app. So if you go to the next tab, which is food per day, then you only have to enter the water temperature of your pond. And the app returns an advice on how much food then you need to give your koi that day. And over how much food moments per day you have to divide that. The more, the better. The advice here says 6 feedings per day. If you can do more, then that's fine. Most important thing is don't chuck it all in at once. And don't start feeding in spring too much. So use the water temperature and don't use it daily, use it weekly to get an estimate of how much food your koi pretty much need at that water temperature. Which is not actually as much important for your koi, but even more important for the bacteria in your filter. Because you think you're feeding your koi at this stage. What you're actually doing is managing your filter bacteria. If the water temperature is too low, then they can't process this nitrogen all at once. So you need to build that up really slow in the spring. Another thing that you really have to realize is that it's not just giving the koi what they need. As I said, your filter needs to process that. Well, the app helps with that. When you go to filter size, you can enter the amount of food that you give daily and enter the filter material that you have. Then the app returns an estimation of how much of that material that you need in square meters or liters. If that is enough, if you have this amount of more filter material, then you're safe on that part. If you have less, consider feeding less or owning less koi or buy a bigger filter. If you need a bigger filter, then the third calculation can help you. Using filter capacity, you can enter the filter materials that are in the filter that you think you want to purchase and see whether it's enough for the amount of food that you want to feed in the future, perhaps even 5 years from now. If you want to buy a new filter, try to look 5 years ahead. How much koi will I be keeping 5 years from now? And what will I be feeding them? How much grams of food will I be feeding them daily? Especially in summer at 24 degrees Celsius, this is when they need most of food. So this is the highest challenge actually for your filter. If you can cope with that amount of food, then you're safe for the future. So in a summary, nitrogen in the koi pond is very important. It's the most basic element of keeping koi. The amount of nitrogen you throw into a pond is actually the amount of nitrogen that needs to leave it. If you understand that, then you're halfway there. And this also dictates how big your filter should be. If your filter can cope with that, 80% of all diseases about koi are actually non-existent. Most koi that die because there's too much nitrogen in the pond in any form. So the amount you put in is also the amount that you have to get out. Use the NVN app to see at 24 degrees Celsius in the summer if your filter is big enough. If it's not, see what you can do about it. Tell this nitrogen story to others and help them by pointing out that there's a free koi app out there which can help them. The last thing I want to do is ask you the question, what can you do to help the hobby and other koi hobbyists? Have fun keeping koi, have fun with the School of Koi. Make sure you subscribe so you get all the other videos of the School of Koi, so you can learn a lot in a short time period, which improves your problem-free koi keeping in the future.